Everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and I've been using the iPhone 13 Pro Max as my main phone over the past month or so. And when I wasn't reviewing the 13 Pro Max, that's the only time I wasn't using it. So maybe I was reviewing the 13 Pro. After that, I found that I was generally coming back to the larger size. Now, in this video, I'm going to cover everything from the durability to how it's held up with scratches, PWM, the cameras, and more. So if you want to jump to any specific part of the video with that information, I always link the chapters or time codes in the description. Now, the first thing, like I said, I've been finding that I always come back to this larger size. Now, that's generally due to me just having larger hands, and I can easily wrap my hand around the iPhone 13 Pro Max or 12 Pro Max. So this is probably more similar to, say, a 13 Pro for most people. But if you have very large hands, I find that this is a very comfortable size. And that's typically why I went with things such as the 11 Pro Max and then switched to the 12 Pro Max and 13 Pro Max. I had really considered using the 13 Pro this year, but the Pro Max, due to a couple different things, is why I stuck with it. Now, it is a big phone. It definitely is a little bit heavier than last year, but I really don't mind since they've increased some of the features with it. Now, ergonomically, if you're coming from, say, an 11 Pro Max or any of the curved phones since the iPhone 6, there's definitely a difference in its overall size or feeling because it's squared off. The squared off edges make it feel a little more premium in my opinion, but they also make it feel larger because you don't have that edge that's rounded where your thumb can just sort of swipe over the display easily. There's definitely a difference. So if you're switching from an older phone to the newer phones, it will feel a bit larger for a while. Because of it being flat to the side, you have less of a chance of hitting the display on anything. So it's held up really well. With the ceramic shield, I don't have a single scratch on the display. There isn't anything on there. And as far as the display goes, it's held up well. No micro scratches at all so far. And I'm not using a screen protector or a case generally. So this matte finish, the Sierra Blue, I think I like the last year's color, Pacific Blue, a little bit better, or Graphite, but Sierra Blue is the new color, so that's why I went with it. But you can see here, it's held up really well. I don't have any scratches on the camera lenses. Some people I know last year were getting dust under them. I haven't seen that myself, and it seems to be holding up well here. And the frame being stainless steel, although it's polished, I don't really have any scratches that I can see on it. I know some people were having issues with that, mostly with the silver sort of iPhone, where it's a polished stainless steel that doesn't have a coating on it or a color coating on it. They tend to show a little bit more scratches. But in general, if you're going to use it without a case, it seems to hold up really, really well. And being stainless steel, it's very durable also. Now, as far as the display goes, the display looks great. It's got 120 hertz ProMotion this year, which makes scrolling and things very smooth. And as more and more apps add support for it, which is really easy, they just need to add it, the scrolling is super smooth. And it helps with battery since it varies the refresh rate from 10 to 120 hertz. So when you go into things such as settings and scroll, it's just really smooth overall. When you're going back and forth, just between apps, Apple's apps in particular are very, very smooth. So if we go into, say, music, we'll wait for browse to load there. You'll see it's smooth here. Now, we're only recording at 60 frames per second, so you're not going to see this 120 hertz, but it definitely makes a difference and it's noticeable. And of course, you could turn it off, but I don't think you'd want to do that as it's one of the advantages to this phone. Now, as far as PWM with this phone, PWM doesn't seem to bother me at all, while the display technically still uses it to control brightness. And for those of you not familiar with that, what it means is pulse width modulation. It flickers the screen faster and slower to control brightness. It's typically how OLED screens control their brightness. Now, this one uses it. I don't see it at all. Even under 240 frames per second slow motion, it's barely noticeable at all. And as you bring the brightness up and down, it will flicker it faster and slower. Now, you can't see this with your eyes, and it does seem to bother about 1 in 10 people. However, with the 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max series, it's just not an issue for me. Where this would typically bother my eyes, cause me to feel nauseated, or give me a headache, I have zero issues with this display. It looks great, no issues whatsoever. So that's great news if you have that issue. Of course, you could always try this out for a few days, and if it doesn't work for you, you could switch to, say, an 11, where you're not going to use that or have PWM because it's an LCD display. But for the most part, it really isn't an issue. Now, the speakers this year are even better than last year. They're super clear, and they've boosted the volume of the top speakers. So when you're watching content in landscape, it sounds great and gives you a better stereo sound than last year. Music played through this is nice and loud, and I wanted to have you hear this. I did download a sample clip, a royalty-free sample clip from Epidemic Sound. So take a listen to this just so you can get an idea of what it sounds like. Now, over time, they haven't distorted or anything after using them for a month. I don't keep it at the highest volume or the full volume, but it still sounds great. Now the speakers sound really good, and at the highest volume, they do distort a little bit. So you bring the volume down, as you saw in the clip there. I brought it down just a little bit to take that edge off, and it doesn't sound as distorted. It sounds nice and clear, and they've done a really great job of making them louder and getting a lot of performance out of tiny speakers this year. And hopefully you could hear the difference that it didn't change much when I brought the top speaker to the microphone as compared to the bottom. They sound very, very similar this year. Now, as far as overall performance, well, with the new A15 Bionic, you're probably not going to notice a huge difference between last year's and this year's. However, if you're coming from an iPhone 10 or an older phone, you will see a difference with speed and performance. Just going into apps is super fast, and we're just waiting for the internet connection here. But going into apps is super fast. If we're playing something like Call of Duty, you'll see we can resume pretty quickly. It connected to the server, and now we're back in. If I go back out, we can maybe switch between that and shortcuts or use something else, and you don't really see any lag whatsoever in the overall experience. Everything's just super fast and fluid. RAM management seems to be great. And like I said, going between different apps, whether it be Call of Duty or it be something else, if you're playing a game online, you're playing maybe Call of Duty or maybe just some other game, could be PUBG or more, the experience is just great overall. No problems whatsoever, super fast. And one great thing this year I've noticed a big difference with is heat overall. The phone does not seem to get as hot as last year. So that goes for the display outside as well. So when you're using the phone, last year the display would dim if it got really hot. So you'd be at high brightness, you're outside on a hot day, it would have to cool the phone down and dim the display back down. I've experienced that far less with this phone, in fact, not at all with this phone, and the phone is not nearly as warm on the back. If we go into something such as Geekbench, within Geekbench, I ran this right before filming this video. You'll see it has great scores, 1712 for single core, 4700 for multi-core, and I'm even on a beta, iOS 15.2 betas, as I run a lot of those, and even with a beta, it performs great. There are some bugs from time to time with iOS software. We'll talk more about that in just a moment, but in general, it's just really fast and fluid. The camera is great. When you're using the camera, it is an improvement over last year, although some people will appreciate the improvements to things such as macro. If you get really close and we snap this photo, you can see the dust on the camera lens, and you can get really nice and close. Of course, you've got 4K HDR video, Dolby Vision, and also Apple ProRes this year on the Pro models. So that's something that really, you can use this as a regular YouTube camera. Most of the time, I'll film outside using an iPhone, and if you use ProRes, I bet very few people could tell the difference unless you know specifically what to look for. There's a lot of things you could film with this, no problem, even indoors, but outdoor as well. Just the quality overall is amazing. So if I hit record now, you'll see now I'm recording with the iPhone 13 Pro Max as opposed to the Sony camera that I have above me. I'm using an FX3 to record this video above here, and you can see there's an FX3 above me, and the quality is amazing. So the forward-facing camera, they didn't do a whole lot with this year, but other features such as if we go into photo, we'll spin it around here. With cinematic mode, I don't find that I use that very often. Cinematic mode's not something that I would personally use unless I was filming a lot of people. But within photos, we have those new modes where you can sort of optimize the photo to look like you want between different standard or rich contrast or vibrant cool and modify it as needed. Or you could just use raw altogether and modify it afterward how you'd like. So the cameras are amazing. It's great to use these just to snap photos or if you want to get a nicer photo. So I'm really impressed with cameras overall on these. They're just a little bump up from last year, of course, with video modes and ProRes. Again, you could use this as your daily camera for YouTube if you wanted to do that. You could film the entire channel just like this one using this camera. Now, as far as my daily use, I'm typically using this for social media, managing YouTube, this channel, things like that, and occasionally photography and games and things. So not too much game playing on here. And if we go to battery, we'll let it load here. Battery health will be 100% on a phone this new, and it degrades over time. It's just normal. 80% after 2 years is normal according to Apple. But battery life on the 13 Pro Max is hard to beat from any phone out there. Yesterday, I had 3 hours and 8 minutes of screen on time, 5 hours and 41 minutes of screen off time, with everything from background activity from Safari and FaceTime and setting up different cameras and messages and more. And some of these things shouldn't be running in the background, but it just gets great battery life. By the time I go to bed with a 13 Pro Max, I'm still over 50% typically. I've been using this morning with the screen on the entire time for this video, of course, using it before that, and I'm at 95% battery life. Like I said, by the time I go to bed at night, I'm at about 55%. Sometimes it just depends. Only once have I brought it under that amount. And if you're on iOS 15.1, there are bugs with those software updates. So sometimes people are experiencing poor battery life from that. And really, it shouldn't be an issue for this phone, but some people will notice a difference with those updates. And we're going to see updates for years with this. So we'll probably see iOS 21 with this phone probably in the future by the time Apple stops making updates for it. So it's got a long way to go as far as being around for a while and being reliable. But battery life is amazing, and reception is probably the only area where I've had issues, and this could be related to potentially the updates that I'm using. Reception has been very hit or miss depending on what update I'm on. On the 13 Pro Max, sometimes I'll have great reception and other times things just won't load. I'll switch on airplane mode, it will disconnect everything. Sometimes I'll disconnect Bluetooth, turn everything back on, and then it fixes the issue. I've been having more and more issues on 5G with this. If I turn off 5G, I typically have less issues. Also, Wi-Fi sometimes is problematic, even though it's not for other devices I have connected to the same network. So I don't know if that's because I'm running betas, but I'm seeing more and more issues with this, even with the Qualcomm modem. But that can be related to software updates as well, with things, maybe calls dropping and more. Generally, it's pretty good compared to previous phones with Intel modems, such as the 11 Pro Max. But overall, I'm very surprised that the software is a little bit buggy with the cellular part of this. I'm surprised it's not working perfectly at this point. And again, it can come down to things such as your carrier and more. So it may not all just be iOS. It could be the carrier putting up new towers or switching between that. So I'm not going to blame Apple 100% on this, but I would love to see that issue resolved, as I don't see as many issues with Android with this. Now, should you wait for iPhone 14 if you don't have a 13 already? Well, you may want to, because the rumor is it's going to look more like an iPhone 4 or 4S, where the camera is flush mounted, and it's going to be about a year away, but they're said to redo the design to be more like this phone. Now, whether or not Apple does that, typically lately they've been on 3-year cycles with sort of the overall design, so we may not see that this coming year. However, they could make it a little bit thicker, maybe even better battery life, and sort of flush mount the cameras this time, making it a little bit thicker. I'm not sure that's going to be true. In a year or so, of course, we'll know for sure, but I'm not sure I'd wait for an iPhone 14 unless maybe you had an iPhone 12 Pro Max and you don't really care about the updates this year. If you have an 11 Pro Max, an iPhone 10 or older, and you want to go to the new design, well then sure, you could try this one out. Of course, if you're on Apple's plan, you could just swap it out every year too if you wanted to. But if you're a long-term phone user that keeps their phone 3 or 4 years and you have a 12 Pro Max, I'd probably wait for next year's. If you have an older phone, I don't really think there's a reason to wait if you can get your hands on one of these. So I think the iPhone 13 Pro Max is great. I'll continue to use it as my main phone. The Mini and the 13 and the 13 Pro are all great phones as well, but they're just too small for me overall. The Pro Max is really more comfortable in my hands. In fact, when I was using the 13 Pro full-time during the review, I found that I was more likely to actually have it slip in my hands because it was smaller. It just seemed like it would fall out of my hands a little easier, and I almost dropped it multiple times. I never have an issue with the larger phone. I can easily hang on to it, and as long as you have pockets to accommodate it, you should be good to go there. But overall, it's a great phone, and I really like using it, and I hope Apple continues to give some better updates for this, maybe with some new features and more. But I'd love to hear from you if you're using a 13 Pro Max, if you're upgrading this year. After a month, it's been a great phone. I'd love to hear your experience in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.